We learned something last year, which is that you basically can't solve America's retirement crisis in 2 hours, and so we figured that we would split our consideration of the retirement issue of financial security over 2 sessions. So Lori's going to lead this one. Michael Heltzik is going to lead the second one. We'll feed you, kale or something in between, so that you will be fortified. But everybody lean in. We need your voices, and we have powerful voices with us to get started. So Lori, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me here. It's been a real education because most of my work in Washington is about how to cut everybody's retirement funds. And so it's sort of refreshing to be involved in a conversation
to the light.
about how to improve financial security. Coming from my dark perspective, as I do, as I've been talking to the panelists and doing some reporting for this session, I've come to think of it as, the title is America's Retirement System Covering All Workers, and I've come to think of it as innovations and disappointments in encouraging private savings, because on the federal level, the auto IRA has been in the president's budget now for, I think, 63 years? Six years?
You're right.
And yet we do not have an auto IRA, when it's sort of surprising given that it seems like something a lot of people could support. So I've been struck talking to Chris yesterday about the magnitude of the coverage problem. I think you said it was half of all workers do not have employer-provided retirement accounts, which is much bigger than healthcare, which is an issue that Washington has addressed. So I've been fascinated to learn about this problem, and I wanted to ask Chris to start off by sort of painting the landscape for us. Define the problem for us and help us to understand what's going on.
Well, I mean, the problem is the coverage gap is a piece of the problem. There's I'll say a broad problem. We tend to think about this in terms of 3 buckets. We've got a coverage gap, which does reflect the fact that roughly 78 million workers don't have access to an employer-sponsored retirement plan. We have what I call the retirement savings adequacy gap, which is the fact that even those who do have a plan, the vast majority of them are not saving enough to retire and support a lifestyle, even with Social Security. And then the third is it's more of an emerging issue that I'll call longevity risk. I think getting more awareness now, but so much of the focus in plans, this is a reflection of the defined contribution environment, is on managing investment risk. I think people are just starting to realize how long they're actually going to live, and that their savings has to last for 25 to 30 years. In fact, I think roughly 25% of men and 33% of women age 65 will live to 90. So that's kind of a daunting statistic if you really stop and think about it. So those are the 3 buckets we think of when we think about things that we need to continue to work on. I will say that there's been progress, certainly, particularly since the passage of the Pension Protection Act in 2006, where safe harbor coverage was provided for employers who wanted to take action on behalf of their employees to get them in a better place in terms of savings. So we've seen tremendous growth in the last several years in the use of automatic enrollment in 401k plans, contribution escalation, and a real focus on the part of a lot of employers to get their employees in better shape. But again, the statistics show that it's still, unfortunately, not enough. I think the Employee Benefits Research Institute says that roughly only 15% of Americans are on a path to achieve a secure retirement, including Social Security. So 85% are not. In looking at how we address that, I think there are 2 elements here. The first element is, I'll say, completing the program for those for those employers and employees that are in a plan. And so for those in a plan, particularly in a DC plan, and I think we all acknowledge that we need to preserve the DB plans we've got, but DC plans are the primary retirement savings vehicle now. They were set up as supplemental plans, weren't intended to be retirement income plans, but that really is what they will be. They are the basis for retirement income for the vast majority of Americans who have them. So we believe that we have to reframe these plans, not call them retirement savings plans anymore, call them retirement income plans. It was interesting to see the Labor Department propose, took quite a while, but they have come out with an advance notice of proposed rulemaking on putting illustrations on statements that translate an account balance into an estimated income stream. And we've actually been doing this for years on our statements, and we have calculators as well that help individuals do the math. And it's fascinating to see the behavioral response to that translation. 20% of people go through this calculator will increase their deferrals 5 percentage points, which is a lot. I mean, you go from a 4% deferral rate to a 9% deferral rate because they realize that they can't live on what that large account balance looks like when it's translated into an income stream. Is not nearly enough to support them in retirement. So making this a standard practice, we think is a good thing. The one additional element here is also enabling the inclusion of options that provide guaranteed lifetime income into DC plans. Today, we have an option that we introduced back in 2007. We have 7,000 plans using it. And these were what I would call early adopters. They were employers that realized they needed to have this solution for their employees. They weren't going to honestly worry about having a safe harbor from the Labor Department in putting that option into their plan. And what was interesting to see through the downturn in 2008, 2009, for the individuals that had this option, actually stayed invested in the market. They have higher contribution rates. They're in much better shape when it relates to where they will be when they retire. So we're continue to advocate for that safe harbor to allow a DB-like option inside of a 401k plan. Now let's turn to coverage for a minute, because that's the other big piece here, is solving this coverage issue. This is very personal for me. My dad was a small employer, and today he's 85, and his 5 children are his retirement plan, because he didn't have the benefit of a solution for himself or for his employees. And we know, as I said, that this is a widespread problem that's particularly prevalent among employers who have less than 100 employees. And I think today the panel will hear some, I hope there are a lot of, I don't think there's one silver bullet here. I think there are a range of options to address this situation, but it is a significant impediment to seeing the vast majority of Americans on the path to a secure retirement. We proposed an idea a couple of years ago that was really based on observing some of the work that we've done with collectively bargained plans. And it's a structure that we call multiple small employer plan. What we were trying to do was form a structure that we felt didn't need huge changes to current law by either the Treasury Department or the Department of Labor. And it could take the infrastructure of the current 401 system and deploy it to these small employers, but address the issues that prevent them from offering plans, which are cost, the administrative complexity and burden, and a concern about the fiduciary risk they're taking on. So this is the concept here, is to allow small employers to pool into a single model plan that the IRS would sign off on, a simpler plan structure than what larger 401 plans have. So, for example, no non-discrimination testing, no employer money, no loans, only hardship withdrawals. Really simplify the administrative elements here, provide access to institutionally priced investment options, automatic enrollment, contribution escalation, and access to a qualified default investment alternative. So it would have access to a variety of investment options. So this is an idea that we feel can leverage, as I said, the existing infrastructure and bring a solution to these employers that solves the cost and the fiduciary and complexity issues. It can be complementary to an auto IRA program. It is, as I said, I don't think there's one solution here. I think there are a variety of solutions. So, but again, I'll just come back to, this is a very important component of shoring up the financial security of all Americans.
Now, David, you are one of the originators of the auto IRA.
Guilty.
And you wrote a fascinating paper with Bill Gale a couple of years ago covering the waterfront of the options that are out there. I'm wondering if you could talk to us about, first of all, where things stand with the auto IRA. From my perspective, it doesn't really look like it's gone much of anywhere and isn't going much of anywhere, but there's some other ideas that you've written about the R bond that may be.
Well, I was thinking when I was flying out here that I'd be the first person in the panel to say that, you know, we've got this Congress that really isn't managing to be very productive. But I've heard rumors that this has been covered already, so I won't say that. Having said that, there are a lot of different ways to get from point A to point B. In the words of that famous conservative Chairman Mao, let 1,000 flowers bloom. And we've got a lot of flowers that are out there right now. Christine just referred to the multiple small employer option. I think that's a very good one, and that will help a significant number of people. The auto IRA is another. And one of the things that Mark Every and I decided early on was that if we couldn't get it one way, we might be able to get it some other way. And we're continuing to look at that. The auto IRA is a very simple, easy to understand plan for employers and employees. One of the goals that we had was that you didn't have to be an MBA to succeed, either as the employer and the sponsor or as the employee and the participant. And there are a lot of ways that we can deal with that. The auto IRA is not moving yet, but we have hopes and plans for moving it or moving pieces of it, and perhaps in different locations, as you'll hear in a few moments here. We are still looking at the Savers Credit, and that is still an essential part. Mr. Neal referred to that Sunday night, as in the Savers Credit is a simple mechanism that actually exists now, except for the fact that it doesn't really do what it's intended to do. We can take the Savers Credit and move it as it was originally proposed to a refundable option that puts additional money in an account. Lori referred to the R bond. The R bond is something that actually originally existed as a fallback mechanism when the IRA was created back 40 years ago. The R bond is a simple account for small savers and new savers, and it allows them to put money into an account, a treasury bond account, until they accumulate a certain amount, at which point they will have the option to move it out into a privately managed plan, hopefully sponsored by their employer. It is simple and low cost, et cetera. But we've got to remember a few other things. Senator Harkin has a plan, a very interesting, innovative plan. All of these are complementary. They're not in competition with each other. All of them could get us from A to B. We have to remember that there are two savings gaps. There is the traditional savings gap that we think about, which is younger employers, the 5 groups that most likely to undersave. Younger people, employees of small business, lower income workers, women, members of minority groups. Those are the ones that are likely to be most helped by both the auto IRA and the R bond and all various and sundry other things. The R bond fits into the mechanism. It would fit into the multiple plan. It would fit into the Harkin plan or the auto IRA or the existing plans right now. There's another gap, which is mid-career. I live in West Virginia. In West Virginia, we are a small business state. We'd like larger employers, but they haven't seen fit to come into the state yet.
Despite Senator Byrd's best efforts.
Despite Senator Byrd's best interests. I mean, we do have a major Navy facility right down the road from me, which we are grateful for. And I'm a little surprised that we didn't rename the state for Senator Byrd after his death. We're still working on that too. But we have a large number of people who go to work for a 401k company out of state, and they want to come home and they work for a smaller business. The smaller business doesn't offer a 401k. So the Auto IRA and the various others are designed so you could roll money out of a 401k into an Auto IRA or multiple small employer plan or any of the others, and then roll it out again. All of these are in the process, but we need to continue, let me rephrase that, to think during this time. It's not just a matter of continuing to push the same things. There are a lot of areas that we can go into. Let me run down really quickly 3 countries who have actually done something about this account. So we've got the UK, which has something called the NEST system. One of the things they've done that we need to look at is that they recognized that smaller savers and new savers, if they were put into a particular default investment account and lost money, might be discouraged from continuing. So they put their money into a stable value fund for a period of up to 5 years. And they found that they actually have very low losses of potential earnings, assuming the market goes up. And this actually takes care of that problem there. This is a requirement on employers to offer their employees in an auto-enrollment system. New Zealand has a really brilliant thing, which does not include an employer requirement at all, but it auto-enrolls everyone as individuals into a retirement savings plan, where they have looked at the individual investments. Australia has both an individual and an employer mandate because it's a mandatory system. They also have a very interesting clearinghouse that they've set up so that smaller businesses can send all of their money to one location and it'll be divided to the providers at that point. We have a lot of areas to work on going forward. One of the things that we do, we talked about financial literacy. I think we make the mistake of confusing financial literacy with financial expertise. This is one of the problems when you have experts doing something. I have a brilliant computer engineer brother-in-law who I showed my new Mac Air to a couple years ago, and he said, "Oh, this is wonderful, this is magnificent. Now, of course, you need this and this and this and this, and I'll put those on for you, and it'll make it even better." The net result was that the battery life went from 8 hours to 2 hours. We don't need to train people. That's the job of the mechanism. That's the job of the planner. Likewise, why is an employer a fiduciary? Why don't you just get a certificate of fiduciary responsibility from the provider, and that's it? And obviously with backups in that case. This is a simplification. The fiduciary responsibility is still there and all the protections are still there. It's just they're located with the experts rather than with the customers there. We have something called a platform account, which is out, which enables individuals to combine savings for retirement and non-retirement savings. This is actually up and active in the UK and Australia and a variety of other places, and it should fit in the US also to an extent. Last but not least, going forward, and these are thoughts, these are not fully formed, and some of them may, as often comes up the case when I'm throwing out thoughts, be completely damn fool ideas. My wife is very good at pointing out to me that, well, that's an interesting thought, but it doesn't make any sense. Damn it, she's usually right, but that's the thing. But one of the things is that we are, at the moment, looking at this division between DB and DC. And does that division really need to exist going forward? We should look at ERISA, the fence that protects us in so many crucial ways, and make sure that doesn't become a cage, that it keeps us from moving into new and innovative methods there. There's one that just came out. I noticed this in an article yesterday. The Metal Workers Union approved a DB plan which puts some of the risk, the investment risk, on the members. And it's interesting because this is very similar to what the Netherlands has with their DB system there. They are not the first. I think they're about the third or fourth to adopt this. Going forward, we've got the auto IRA on the table. We've got the multiple. We've got to get them moving here, but that doesn't mean we stop there. And if we are stymied in one area, well, you know, there are other states and localities that might be able to take up the challenge here.
What an excellent transition you provided me with.
You'd think we'd arranged it.
Well, that brings us to State Senator Kevin De Leon, who is sort of a rock star in this world of gridlock because he's actually managed to pass something. And he told me the other night that Senator Tom Harkin told him that he was his hero because Senator Harkin is feeling, you know, pretty much in an impasse in Washington. So, Kevin, could you explain to us exactly how the California retirement program would function and how you overcame what you've called the FUD factor, the sowing of fear, uncertainty, and doubt by folks who opposed your plan?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Lori, and good morning to each and every one of you again. Just really quickly, I think just to paint a human face, today's Tuesday, so this morning, about perhaps 3 hours ago, there was a woman who got up early morning, and she took the number 2 bus to downtown San Diego. And when she got to downtown San Diego, she transferred to another bus that took her across the Coronado Bridge to her final destination, which is a very wealthy enclave, which is Coronado Island. And that was her final destination. And she went to the homes with the panoramic views of the Pacific Ocean. And there, this woman who's north of 70 years of age, and I just found out the other day that she's actually 74. I couldn't get her age from her for a long time. She spent the vast majority of her day cleaning homes. And she does this because her only reliance to survive on a daily fashion is her Social Security check. And she needs to do this because she needs to be able to pay the rent to put the roof over her head, and she needs to pay for her medications, and she needs to pay for the food that's on her table. And this woman is my aunt, who is like my second mother. She raised me along with my mother and my 2 older sisters and my grandmother. So it was a largely all-female household, you know, with no male, you know, present. But I learned a lot from her and her very amazing, strong work ethic. And she is the salt of the earth. And I tell this story because her story is not unique. Her story is the story of tens of millions of Americans throughout the whole country who have no access to any defined benefit or defined contribution at their place of employment. And for California, I think, you know, Christine did a really good job with regards to explaining what the problem is. And in California, we have 6.3 million Californians who have no access to any type of defined benefit or defined contribution, or for that matter, on their own proactively have sought out some sort of product, whether it's been solicited or if they themselves proactively have gone on the internet or walked into a brick and mortar to purchase some type of product. So we have 6.3 million Californians, again, who have no access to any type of retirement security at their place of employment. Of that 6.3 million, it's roughly about 8.4 million total if you include those who are self-employed. Now, about 64% of that 6.3 million are workers of color. They're workers of color. And of senior citizens who live in poverty in California, 2/3 of those senior citizens are women. 2/3 of the senior citizens who live in poverty today in California are in fact women, majority women of color. And about a third, 33%, and this is not a California statistic, but rather it's a national statistic, 33% of all Americans ages 45 to 54 actually have not one single cent that has been saved for any type of retirement in the near future. So these are individuals, obviously, who don't have access or have not been yet touched by some program, a 501c3 for financial literacy, for example. They haven't been touched by a financial advisor to help navigate the really perilous journey to retirement security. It's very complex. Excuse me. And so I think the main question is can we as policymakers, those who work in think tank groups, those in the financial services industry, can we provide a modicum of dignity and respect to those individuals? I think that's the thesis of this panel today, is can we provide a modicum of dignity and respect to these individuals? So what I've been doing the past few years, since 2008, when I was in the lower house in the assembly, I introduced a measure which was AB 2940 and AB 125, which was a California employee savings plan. It was supported by then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. Unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of luck getting out of then the Senate Appropriations Committee, but I went back into the laboratory. Then Mark Irie from the at that time, Brookings Institution, and the New America Foundation were supporters of that measure, and they provided an awful lot of good, sound technical advice. Long story short, it didn't go nowhere. So ironically, instead of scaling back and becoming much more conservative, we actually did quite the opposite. I went much bigger, much bolder, and I just huddled with my staff over the summer of last year, and we came up with a lot of ideas, and we put it together legislatively. So this is an issue, obviously, that we've talked about a lot in many ways, not just here, but throughout the whole country. And I think now is the time that we turn these ideas actually into action. So what's in front of us right now is not the theoretical and not the abstract, but actually the real, the reality. So SB 1234 passed last year, the California Secure Choice Act, just right before midnight, August 31st, 2012. It was signed by Governor Jerry Brown on August 28th of last year. And the features of the Secure Choice program are automatic enrollment for all individuals who do not have access to an employee-sponsored plan. So it's automatic enrollment. It's automatic payroll deduction. It is portable, low cost, therefore low fees. It will have principal protection. We're talking about a subset of a larger universe who are most vulnerable to the violent gyrations of the market. It will be professionally managed. Therefore, we will, collect and pool the money together. The president's version currently in the Congress right now, the auto IRA enrollment, the individual, the worker would have to carry 100% of the risk. We don't do that with this plan. We pool the money together collectively over multiple horizons, so we lower the risk. And a little part's controversial, and I get this part. We have a guaranteed rate of return. We have a guaranteed rate of return with a reinsurance backstop. We have to figure out what the price points are to see if it's going to be economically feasible at the end of the day. Those are very legitimate questions. Obviously, it's not going to be tied to some derivative out there. It's going to be conservatively managed because, again, this is a population that is most vulnerable to the risk of the gyrations of the current market. And that is our plan, the California Secure Choice Act. If we can get this done in California, we do believe that it will be a model for the entire nation. We've moved the ball farther than anyone else in the nation. Ignorance is bliss, because in some ways we didn't know exactly what we were doing. We were kind of stumbling into things, and it was like an experiment of putting things together. But the one thing that I think I said yesterday is arithmetic is arithmetic. And the issue is not complex. The solution is not that overly complex either, in my opinion. What is complex is the politics of the issue and the lack of leadership at this issue at the various levels, and we're looking forward, and obviously we'll do a Q&A. We'd love to have fresh eyes look at this as well too, and get ideas from every individual. A lot of folks who know a lot of stuff on this issue, but we're happy that it got passed. It was very controversial. The Wall Street Journal opined on it. The New York Times opined on it. Bloomberg News just called early this morning for an interview on the issue. So it's similar. You know, we looked at the Kiwi program in New Zealand. We looked at the NEST program in the UK, which is a National Employee Savings Trust Act. The difference between the NEST and us in the UK, you have roughly about 60 million people who live in the UK. The 7th largest economy in the entire world. California, we have 40 million. We're the 8th largest economy in the entire world. They have the mandated employer match, which is 1% to 3% that escalates over the course of 6 years. We don't have an employer match on that one. I know some folks believe in the philosophy of shared responsibility, completely understand and are in agreement with it, but politically, even among a majority democratically controlled House and Senate, it would have been very, very difficult to move it forward. But we're not going to let the perfect get in the way of the good. Also, too, if we can set a foundation that can give access, dignity, and respect to so many millions of Americans who deserve it.
I want to get to the barriers to, talk more about the barriers to enacting some of this stuff that, you know, on a totally objective level seems very reasonable, and it's hard to understand why things aren't moving forward in more places. But first, Kathleen, you're familiar with, I believe, Maryland, where you served as a lieutenant governor, is interested in this approach and moving forward. Other states, and you have some thoughts about how to get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Lori. Good to see you again. Lori covered me when I was lieutenant governor years ago. So I want to thank Kevin. I think he is really a hero across the country and for all of us, not just in California, but for what he's accomplished. Because what he's been able to do is think of retirement security in a whole new way. Many of you remember that there was a lot of criticism a few years ago, and still goes on, against defined benefit plans. And the major discussion in about pensions and retirement was how bad defined benefit plans and how public employee workers didn't deserve these plans, and they're costing too much money, and what's going on, and isn't this unfair? And thanks to Kevin, that conversation is shifting. And rather being on the defensive about protecting defined benefit plans, Kevin has helped us move forward and say everybody should have retirement security. And I want to thank him for that. I'm here in large part because of Josh Gottbaum. I'm going to blame you on this, Josh. When I was at a conference, because I work at an investment management group, which just works with defined benefit plans, and Josh said, the worst defined benefit plan does a better job than the best defined contribution. And I thought, and he said it at the height of the controversy of defined benefit, and I thought, well, that is interesting. Then why aren't we building more defined benefit plans if Josh is correct? So I think what we've seen is that, and Kevin has done a very good job of this, is understanding that what defined benefit plans give you is, as you said, professional management, pooled risk, and therefore lower fees. And people have much more security in that system than they have in other systems. I work at Rock Creek, which is, as I said, an investment management firm. It was formed by people. A third had come from the World Bank, where they advised systems around the world about how you set up your pension plans, helped, in fact, set up the pension plan in New Zealand. And in fact, I met with the head of the superannuation fund because the group that I work with helps them set up that kind of plan, because they understand how do you do it well. Because of Kevin's leadership in California, 6 other states, including Maryland, is looking at this. Oregon has just passed it. And because of that, we've been working, and I'll just give you, if you want, the number of the states are interested. And what we found there are a number of questions that are different than the ones that you would face at the moment in California. Some of the questions have to do with who supports it. For instance, this is what Kevin has told me. In California, the financial industry is not so interested because they think that although it will be competed out, that CalPERS will probably be able to manage it. But in Maryland, we don't have a CalPERS. We're a much smaller group. So the financial groups in Maryland are very interested in this and would like to make it a mandate because they see that this will be a way for them to manage more money and get more customers. So there are different political groups supporting this in different states. In other states, if you're just interested, the question comes, what's the governance structure? You have a governance structure of CalPERS, but in other states, the question is, who makes the decision of how the money will be invested? In New Zealand, for instance, they set up what is called a 2 arm's length system where you can, the finance ministers choose 10 people or so. Those people don't even have to be from New Zealand. They can be from all around the world, choosing the best people, and then they choose in turn the people who actually manage the money, so that the money is managed in as professional way as possible. What we've also seen, and what I mentioned when I introduced myself, I'm chair of a group called the Leadership Center for the Common Good, which is a community organizing group in about 17 states. And they have been focused on fairness for low-income people, primarily paid sick days, living wage, and payday loans and foreclosure issues, predatory lending. And so we're meeting now with 40 other organizing groups on a monthly basis to see how we can make this happen in the 7 states. Because what we've seen is that you can have the experts believe that Kevin is right. As Lori said, it looks pretty obvious. But my belief of politics and democracy, just because the experts think it's right, doesn't mean it's going to work. You have to have people on the ground saying, we want this to happen, so that they can understand that when the bill is passed, it's their victory, not just the victory of a few people who have a good idea. And that's going to be critical because so many low-income, poor people don't have, as we've heard over and over again, the trust with the banks. They have not had a good experience, particularly during 2008. And so these laws can't be internal laws. They have to be really come from these citizen organization. And I think that the bottom line is to this is that what Kevin has done and what we're trying to all do here is figuring out how we're going to, I think you said this earlier, Jean, we have to think big and bold. You told me that this won't solve all the problems. You're right. But what I see, what Kevin is doing and what these other states are doing is building a massive, I hope, a political movement that says, whether it's retirement income or retirement security or freedom when you're older, movement that says eventually the politicians in Washington, even though they're not doing it now, will answer to this and will get a decent retirement for all Americans.
I'm going to open it to questions in just a minute, but first I wanted to ask Chris, I don't mean to put you on the spot as representative of the entire financial services industry. But is Kathleen's characterization of the opposition to Kevin's bill accurate, and how can we sort of bridge this divide?
I think the dialogue between private and public is really important, and you have to understand, I'll say, the underlying mechanisms here. I think some of the question is a question of a state-specific structure versus a federal structure, just because of the economies of scale dynamic. We have to work today, for example, with 50 state insurance departments. It's a challenge. And so a system that is different depending upon the state is honestly, I think that's part of the challenge here, is figuring out how you make that work. And then I think the other is just understanding the structure here and the competitive dynamic and wanting to have a level playing field. And, I don't know that there's not, I don't know that there is, but I think that would be one of the questions that the industry would have with regard to
a level playing field in terms of?
Yeah, being able to compete. It sounds like the way Kevin has described it to me is that firms would be able to compete for some of the attributes of the plan. So that's a good thing. That's a really good thing.
What about on a federal level? What have been the barriers to prevent? I mean, I'm no expert on this, but years ago when I first talked to David about the auto IRA, I thought, oh, that'll pass right away. And yet,
I
it
thought
has
that
not.
too. Damn it. One of the things that has happened is that we got caught up in ideology, which occasionally rears its head in Washington these days. There is a requirement that employers offer the auto IRA, and there are limitations there. It has to be over 10 employees, and they have to be in business for over 2 years. So we didn't have the question of the startup right off the bat. But after the healthcare debate came about, there was the question raised about, well, gee, are we putting on yet another mandate on employers? And that has continued to be a very serious problem. Now, let me say that when we were developing this, we talked to literally dozens of small employers, and we went through this for years talking about this and making revisions and the like. And at one point, one company was kind enough to do some research for us and some polling, and the polling was done both of employees, and the employees liked it. We had 85% who said they would start saving earlier than they would have otherwise, and a startlingly high percentage that said that even if every employer in the country offered this, they would still feel more loyalty to their own employer because that company offered it. But they also were kind enough to survey employers. And the more the employers heard about this, the stronger the support came out. So what we are seeing right now is a mention of a word and an immediate response of hell no. We need to get a little bit past that and into more of the discussion of what this actually does and how it would work.
So if you have questions, just put up your name tag like we have in the past, and I'll start with Congressman English.
But also say that, if anything, generous, because I believe that it is a major breakdown of the system that issues, not simply auto IRA, but the whole broader issue of retirement security has not been brought to the fore. And there is plenty of blame to go around, starting with the White House, which I don't think listens to some of its own people in Treasury, on down through Congress. And right now there is a very high degree of gridlock, but nevertheless, there are members on the key committees, and you met, many of you, one of them the other night, who have been a leader on this. When I was in the House, Mr. Neal and I partnered on the auto IRA issue, and there was a great deal of potential interest, but the problem has been that in the hot issues that have been bubbling around, this has never quite been brought to the front and put forward as a singular priority. That's really what it requires. It requires, if anything, engaged presidential leadership and also people in both houses willing to steer the concept past some of the initial concerns of both sides. I mean, something like an auto IRA is not as politically sexy for either the right or the left as a whole range of other things that they'd rather be talking about. I think it's very important that a coalition be built to move this forward. I happen to think this summit has gone a long way toward advertising the issue. Beyond that, I'd like to bounce this to the senator, who I very much admire what you're doing. You're obviously thinking outside of the box. You are obviously a wonderful man, and may I say, when I was in office, I also like to think that I could do something to empower my constituents or give them, by my actions, a greater sense of worth. I actually think that much of what needs to be done in empowerment has to be done outside of the political system right now. But Senator, could you speak to the fact, this will not seem like I'm picking on you because I'm from Pennsylvania, which is in comparable straits. In a state where municipalities and, you know, frankly, the state pension system have been a disaster area, how do you sell the idea of the state taking over and being the custodian of a major part of the retirement system?
That's a very good question. One, you know, California is on the comeback right now. We have a balanced budget this year, unlike Washington, D.C., and we had one last year. We don't have a treasurer who can print money ongoing and have ongoing deficits in California. So we are on the upswing. We've have the largest job creation in the country right now. We have about 2 million jobs that just been created. Although I will say we're not at where we should be, and we do have a long way to go still in California. But we've turned that tipping point where there's a little more breathing room, if you will. We have a surplus of $4 billion, which is a sliver. It's a margin, but it's a little more rosier picture right now. So obviously it's incumbent on us as elected officials to do everything within our power to create the conditions for job growth, economic growth. You know, I'm a Democrat. I'm a progressive Democrat, and I'm keenly aware that as politicians, we don't create jobs. We are not the direct creators of economic growth. We can create the conditions for economic job growth. That being said, that's a very good question. And I know during the course of the debate last year, it was part of the oppositional arguments to defeat SB 1234. With the larger overarching debate in the country, but especially acute in California with regard to defined benefit and pension liabilities or no liabilities, you know, that colored SB 1234. Therefore, the arguments were, well, if the state of California and local municipalities are on the dime with regards to billions of dollars of liabilities that may or may not be paid out in the near future with regards to defined benefit programs, how is it possible that the state of California is now going to embark on a larger project, which is to provide a defined benefit pension scheme to private sector workers? Now, and who would be who would be footing the bill in the event if we can't meet our guaranteed rate of return, for example, if it goes south, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Let me clarify that the taxpayers, and I've drafted and designed this measure, that the taxpayers are not on the hook. Therefore, we have a guaranteed rate of return that requires a reinsurance backstop. We have to speak, obviously, with folks who potentially will be the insurers. Maybe we'll get some folks who will step up. Maybe we'll get some folks who don't step up for the reinsurance component. But we drafted the measure that the taxpayers of California are not on the hook. That was essential in terms of my arguments with Governor Jerry Brown, as well as some more moderate to conservative members in the Senate, as well as the Assembly. Now, I know you're referring to Stockton and the potential bankruptcy and other municipalities in California, like other states and cities throughout the country, but the taxpayer is not on the hook, number one. Number two, folks wanted on the left, especially labor, and I understand that they wanted employer match of some sort, philosophically, for shared responsibility. Politically, it was too difficult. Even in a democratically controlled legislative body with a Democrat in the executive office, that being Jerry Brown, folks would view that and perceive it as, because we were still in the middle of a really horrible deficit, and it impacted California disproportionately because of the housing crisis in California. We had cut $40 billion in our budget the past few years. So to say that small businesses, mid-sized businesses would now have a 10% increase tax, if you will, to fulfill an employer match for this program, we didn't move forward with that. So there is no liability with regards to the taxpayers because it's not a DB scheme for private sector workers. And I think it's very, very important to sort of discriminate between the two different types of programs. This is not a liability, nor will it be a liability on taxpayers of California.
Good luck.
Thank you.
And Congressman, just as I didn't want to make Chris speak for the entire financial services industry, I won't ask you to speak for every Republican in Congress, but, you know, I'm curious, given that your party has struggled with, it's, not everyone would agree, the proposal to cut Medicare or change Medicare, talking about now restraining Social Security growth, do you see any potential for what has become a conversation about cutting entitlements to turn into more of a conversation about how do we solve the larger retirement problem?
Absolutely. And I think that much of the discussion on entitlements has been driven by concerns about long-term deficits, the fiscal health of the country. But you can take these issues, which are grassroots empowerment issues, and I think repackage them as a way of providing capital not only to low-income people, but also increasing the national savings rate with benefits that in the long term are going to be substantial to the United States. I think what we're talking about with auto IRA, savers credit, kids accounts, are things that can attract and encourage investment, but also change the culture of the people that we're trying to empower, and in the process have all kinds of spin-off benefits which will compound over time. And I think there are conservatives who understand that, and I would argue understand it better than many progressives do, and I think are ripe to be engaged. I think you raise a very interesting point, though, because many Republicans have been courageous in taking on directly the fact that we do have a crisis in Medicare. Sorry, we do have a crisis in Social Security, and one that isn't going to be simply addressed by raising taxes. Those issues are central to the long-term strength of the country. Republicans have gone out on a limb repeatedly on them, and sometimes inartfully, and at several key junctures, the limb has been sawed off. I think that that's part of the environment that is going to shape how you engage both parties and bring them together. There's plenty of legitimate reason for distrust on both sides. And as a result, it's going to be very difficult, I think, to move forward because some of the issues we're talking about in these panel are compact. They don't carry the baggage that some of the bigger issues do, and I think you can bring more people into the debate. I will comment that I like the governor's comments, but honestly, you will have an enormous challenge, not just with Republicans, but with a lot of people in the private sector selling the fact that a defined benefit plan is going to be a universal option in coming years. We spent a lot of time on Ways and Means working with a variety of potential ways of tackling the retirement crisis going back to the 1990s. And unfortunately, there is an enormous challenge and a substantial cost that we haven't really discussed here that is associated with defined benefit plans that isn't simply something you can eradicate by consolidation and having fewer management fees. There are some enormous challenges now with defined benefit plans. But we have a number of experts here that I think can probably hold forth on that with much more detail than I can.
Josh, and then I'll go around this way.
It's very easy to call for presidential leadership. I've been in Washington this stint 3 times around, and what I've been told by a lot of members of Congress, some Democrats and lots of Republicans, is that the last thing they want is a presidential endorsement. And that in complicated, thorny issues, that endorsement may actually prevent them from getting a compromise. Okay. I think what Kevin is doing is important, and I think it's worthwhile talking about it structurally. What Kevin is doing and what the other states are doing is saying they're looking for a vehicle in which employers do what only they can do. They can gather people. They can really cheaply, really economically pool their cash. They can really cheaply send that cash. What employers, some of them, and there are still, fortunately, since even in the private sector, 20% of the people who have any kind of employer retirement system have a DB plan. So this thing about DB being dead, I respectfully disagree strenuously.
Didn't say it was dead, just said it was shrinking.
Yeah, well, actually, I heard a slightly different thing, which I'll get to in a second. So you want to allow those, but since the majority of employers clearly do not want to be required to put up cash, since the majority of employers clearly do not want to do more, to have legal fiduciary obligations on them, what Kevin and the others are doing is saying, let's preserve what is really smart and good about employers and separate out the rest. The other piece, the other genius in this thing is that it avoids forcing individuals from doing what individuals are lousy at. Okay, individuals are lousy at being their own investment managers. I mean, I've been an investment banker, I've been a pension trustee, I've invested a lot of money. I don't manage my own money. Okay, but it also turns out that individuals are lousy at choosing managers too, and individuals are lousy at negotiating fees, et cetera. And so the benefit of this proposal is that it enables individuals to get a retirement plan, that offers a minimum return. I would hope someday you would actually get to lifetime income, but I didn't hear that. Get a minimum return without having to become an investment expert, et cetera, and without having to take individual risk. I think this is a really important effort. It is, however, one that, as several people have pointed out, including, by the way, Damon Silvers yesterday, that forces us to rethink the architecture of retirement planning. So my question will be, and I'm going to warn Chris and David in advance, is in the period in which we do not expect the Congress of the United States to agree on anything, what can the Labor Department and the Treasury Department, who you mentioned, do to advance retirement security? However, before I pass that question on, I just want to point out the fact that the notion that universal defined benefit is anathema is, in my view, misplaced. Okay, and that there is an opposition to it. What is very clear is that there is a powerful reaction to the fact that people underpriced the universal guarantee, that people didn't fund the universal guarantee. I mean, what was done in Illinois and not in New Jersey, I do name names, probably because I'm in Washington rather than there, was not that they should not have made the promise, but that they didn't fund the promise. Right. Now, the fact that organizations didn't fund the promise has put some of them in disrepute and financial distress. The fact that the promise became more expensive than people thought has led others to say, I want to get out. However, as recently as this morning, Orrin Hatch, last time I checked, not considered to be a liberal, Orrin Hatch announced a bill which he said would facilitate state and local public plans from continuing to offer a pension, except that that pension would be annuities purchased from folks like Prue. And so from my perspective, the challenge here is that you really do need to rethink the rules. And so my question for the panelists, the experts more, is while we're waiting for the Congress and while we're cheering the various state efforts, what could we in the executive branch do that would be useful?
Well, I will start by saying I am not a lawyer. You know, with respect to the multiple employer plan structure, I think our belief is that the changes that would need to be made to, you know, tax rules regarding, you know, if one employer failed to, it's the one bad apple rule, basically. That rule, as well as the DOL rule governing commonality of interest that would allow us to set up these multiple employer plans, that could potentially be done through regulatory change as opposed to legislative change. Now, you know, is that faster? I don't know. It sounds to me on the surface like it should be. But that's, as I said, I'm not a lawyer, but that's my understanding, is that it could actually occur through regulation as opposed to requiring legislation.
I'm going to continue in that line. I'm also not a lawyer, but I was trained as an economist, and that may be even worse. So the regulatory process is slow and deliberate. I think that what the Department of Labor put out on the lifetime income is crucially important. I think there are a number of other steps that are ongoing with that, things to make it easier to have an annuity through an employer-sponsored plan. That's what you'll hear in the next panel for a large measure. We have other things here that we're the policy committee, or the policy community, if you will. And we have a lot of other answers that we need to come up with. One of the things is that the structure of the workforce is changing. So one of the things that, I don't know if this is regulatory or whether this is legislative, is to make sure that an employer can open up their retirement system, their retirement savings system in this case, to somebody who is brought on as a temporary employee or a contract employee or something like that, without being dinged then by IRS as having that individual as a permanent employee. There are a lot of different areas. We are in a nation now that it looks like we will have a continuing group of individuals, a larger proportion, who are not traditional employees or who are shorter term employees. And that means that we're going to have to open up the retirement savings system, the pension system, if you will, to make sure that these individuals have the ability to save throughout without interruption and without necessarily having to have the kind of financial expertise, because I don't manage my money myself either. I tried for a while and discovered that I was utterly disastrous at this. So there are a lot more questions that need to be approached. And as I mentioned earlier, one of these is the fact that we treat DB and DC as never the twain shall meet. And I don't think that realistically is the way that we're going to go forward. I think that there are a lot of other shifts that are going to be looked at in the future that we used to call it the DB-ification of DC or something appalling like that. But all of that is what we can do in the interim.
Jim?
Senator, the guaranteed rate of return, is there any thought to just limiting that to older workers rather having it be across the age spectrum?
It's a good question. We haven't figured that out yet because there's a lot of open-ended questions right now. With the guaranteed rate of return, obviously, it requires a reinsurance, a backstop of some sort. And we have to price that out. So we have to make sure if we can actually do this, if that part is doable, is it economically feasible with regards to our overarching principles to provide something that's at low cost, low fee. So that's an open-ended question that's yet to be answered. There's several open-ended questions, for example, in terms of should we have cross-selling, for example, and should we have a clearinghouse of providing other types of products, you know, that other folks may offer. There's pros and cons to that. Should it be annuitized, you know, on the back end? There are pros to that. There's cons to that too, you know, lifetime stream of income. Should it be one lump sum? You know, there's pros to that. You get one lump sum. And there's cons to that, and you may blow it in Vegas, you know. So, you know, there's some several open-ended questions that we're still scrutinizing right now. But we passed the gargantuan, you know, major hurdles, if you will, you know, both politically and I think to a large degree policy-wise too. And we are close, you know, maybe give it 12 months. You know, we're going to do our feasibility study, our legal study as well too. Mike Davis, when he was at the Department of Labor, you know, was very, very, you know, very obviously very intelligent, very helpful and insightful. And we're working with the Department of Labor as well as the Treasury, the IRS specifically.
Sort of, you know, philosophically, what was the reasoning to making the benefit that expansive, as given that it's maybe problematic?
With the guaranteed rate of return?
Right.
With guaranteed rate of return, well, this is, you know, we didn't want it to be, if you will, an overglorified savings plan and have a much more robust, if you will, return in comparison to other products that are out there in the market. Not to say that this product is a better product than anyone else that they may offer. I'm not saying that, you know. But again, this is a population in terms of replacement income. The gap is just so much wider for them that they're going to have to make it up with stagnation with regards to salaries, wages. This is a population that can assume the risk, you know, into international equities and other types of investments, that they'd be exposed and much more vulnerable to losing, and the recovery from it is I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's almost near impossible. So with a guaranteed rate of return, we want to provide that income right there.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, but I guess why not, you know, again, given that it could be problematic going forward, you mentioned with the pricing, why not just from the get-go limit it to older workers, I think, you know, from 30 years old, even as old as I am now, I'm certainly far less worried about
Do you mean
volatility.
But we are looking at that too. We're looking at the different tranches, not tranches, but rather the different demographics, if you will, between the age, you know, when you're automatically enrolled, you're 18 and over. It's a different dynamic when you're 30 and above, when you're 50 and above, and how the investment strategies work and how we're going to do that. So what I can say is I can't give you a precise answer to that question right now, but we're definitely looking into it right now.
The back of the room? Yeah.
Hi, my question was really around the role that technology can play, and just wanted to kind of take an example and to further illustrate the question. So we talked about how, on average, most workers don't feel like they have a secure retirement ahead of them. But in a certain community, a lot of people have given examples here, in the more affluent community, most people do. Anywhere from 75 to 90% feel like they're on the path to a secure retirement. Some of the reasons we've talked about, you know, they have access to lower cost vehicles, they have access to professional money management. Two of them I don't think we've discussed. One is they have access to an advisor, and second is they have access to a plan. They do things like Christine mentioned, where they convert their savings pools from multiple jobs or multiple contractors. They might have been an independent contractor, an employee. All of that is put into one vision and shows them this is how we can convert it into income. So all of that information makes them feel more successful, both in saving for retirement and living in retirement. And I think the role technology can play is to create that same experience or simulate it for the masses. And I was just curious if that has come up, or do we leave enough room in the policy for innovations like that to make sure the whole package is created, because even if you create the savings vehicles, it's very complex how you turn that into income and what order you take that income out in.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on in terms of the concept of using technology as an important part of a communication or education program for, I'd say, probably any one of these options. And you know, what's interesting is we are very focused on building applications and tools that are available on smartphones, because not everybody may have a computer, but a very, very high number have a smartphone. So you have to go to where, you know, you use what you've got, what the population has. It won't work for everybody, but the accessibility is broader through that mechanism in all likelihood than having people have to rely on having a computer at home. But technology can do amazing things in terms of helping people understand what they've got.
Can you describe how it helps people? And I say this because one of the issues that you raised, which I thought was very interesting and important, is somebody needs advice. Right. And I have a cousin who's said it's trying to help people, and it's such a funny thing. He said that he's hired people to give advice, and he's discovered that ex-Marines give great advice, whereas ex-Navy guys give terrible advice. Or that they don't. So in other words, it matters kind of who the person, it's not that they give bad advice, it's people can listen to the Marines and they can't listen to the Navy guys. Why, I don't know. Who knows? But it raises the question of, you know, how do you listen? You know, technology would be great if everybody could use technology and could listen. And you are in financial services, so I think it would be interesting to hear from you or from anybody else. What technology have you found that people can use, that what percentage of people use it that actually helps them?
Right. Well, and in my experience, the fastest growing part of advice is actually digital advice, because people feel like they have more control over it.
Right.
You can look at the assumptions and see what they're basing their recommendations on, but you have to be comfortable in that format.
Right. No, I understand those questions. I don't know if you guys have any percentages, like do 1% of the people be able to use it? Is it 0.5%? You know, in other words, of the affluent, how many percentage? And you may not know, but I would think in the next 2 years we'll have better answers to that.
Yeah, and even in the affluent space, the majority of affluent customers have both an advisor that they go sit or call on the phone face-to-face.
Right.
The majority of them, over 60%, also get advice online. So they're using both. Yes,
That's amazing.
today.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I
If
think
I
there
could
is
add
a,
something to just to that. There's another component too, which I think is really important, and I bet you would agree to it, which is, do you actually execute the advice? And lots of people like the plan, but I think it's very hard to measure, did I not execute on the plan because I didn't like it, or did I not execute on the plan because I didn't have the wherewithal, the discipline, the cultural orientation to do it. And I would just cite as evidence anyone who's ever joined a gym in January, you know, as sort of case in point. And what we've seen, you know, and we serve, you know, 8 or 9 million predominantly savers out of our direct bank.
Right.
And the greatest level of savings accumulation are for people who engage in recurring savings plans, who have taken part of what we call our savings goal. So they have a specific thing that they've earmarked the money for, that they are working for.
Oh, that's
And interestingly, we've actually started to build a social network of, you know, sort of savings Americans, where folks can connect in an online digital community and engage with folks who are equally committed to reaching their savings goals. And again, sort of excuse the analogy, but it's a little bit of, you know, going to a gym with a group or being part of a Weight Watchers or something like that. I mean, there is strength in the public commitment to one another. And so I think you have to think about it not just as the plan, but what's the whole path to actually executing on it.
Yeah.
And another aspect of that has got to be the automatic features. Because we know, for instance, I've seen studies that in minutes, the time between advice is given and it's executed, the proportion who actually follow that advice declines. We have very firm evidence now that, in particular, low and moderate income individuals are much more likely to stick with the defaults in that. So it's not just a matter of, this is again the difference between literacy and expertise. It's not just a matter of us telling you and you doing it. It's a matter that this is set up. So it may not be the perfect system, but it is the one that produces at least a pretty good result.
And I mean, we use tools that, I talked about the income calculator, but with auto enrollment, we find that we have about 94% of participants stick. So that's, and I think Aon Hewitt did a study that suggested that with auto-enrolled plans, the participation rate was roughly 82% compared to 62% in plans that didn't have it. So it shows the power of the automatic. And if you can use tools, we have an asset allocation tool, so all somebody has to do is provide their age and, you know, how they think about risk, and then you can put them into, and automatically enroll them, put them into a portfolio, and they're done.
Yeah.
And it's fast and easy and relatively painless, and that's what they need to take the action.
Let's stay in the back of the room and go this way.
I just very much agree with the last round of comments and the importance of automatic enrollment and similar initiatives to get people into the system and keep them in the system. I had a small point/question and maybe a larger one. David, you've been in the trenches on this set of issues for a very long time. I wonder whether on the auto IRAs, you know, it would be worth giving up on the mandate in order to try and get this set of initiatives through, which are just so critical. You know, can you put in a sweetener of some kind to get small businesses to sign up instead, like the simple plan? So is that trade-off a good idea, and you know, why, or is now not the right time to do it? I guess the larger question, this really goes to Senator De Leon's point about thinking big. You know, should we be, you know, we should maybe keep doing all these other things, but can we lift the whole game on this by having a bigger conversation about, you know, a grand bargain on savings and the future of our country? I know we've all, you know, we've had these depressing conversations about the state of politics in Washington, but I wonder whether we could enrich, enliven, embolden that by going back to, you know, I don't know, like President Clinton's, you know, universal savings account idea, which is at a very large level, big agreement on Social Security and on deficit reduction and a path for the future of the country. If we all kind of brought that together and kind of forced Washington to have a more interesting conversation, is that just pie in the sky, or is it worth doing?
Sure. Thank you, Michael, for the question. I do truly believe that this issue is a bipartisan issue. It's not a ideological or partisan issue. I think that a grand bargain, maybe similar to some of the deals that then President Bill Clinton cut with the Republicans, is quite possible. It's still in Washington, D.C., even with the dysfunction that's so deeply rooted on a whole variety of other issues. Because this is non-ideological, non-partisan, and to me, this is a national security issue. It's just not low-income workers, the vast majority who are, you know, folks of color, but it is middle-income workers who will retire into poverty. There are a lot of folks, Republicans, who will be severely impacted, and the electorate as a whole, taxpayers, will be footing the bill. And the public policy consequences are very severe at the federal and state level with regards to the safety net, taking care of all these senior citizens, regardless of their gender, regardless of their ideological inclination, regardless of the color of their skin, political partisanship. I think that this is quite possible. I do truly believe, even though I didn't get Republican support in California, I still subscribe strongly, for some odd reason, that we can have a grand bargain, a bipartisan bargain in Washington, D.C. on this specific issue. I think it's going to be contingent on the financial industry, if they want to collaborate. Because through my experience with the Republicans, without getting into the complex weeds, because although the issue is simple, it's not complex. When you get into the technical aspects, this gets very complex. My experience with very well-intentioned Republicans, where they were objecting to talking points that were distributed to them by the financial services industry. Things like, this is a defined benefit for the private sector. Tens of billions, not tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars taxpayer liability. The issue of ERISA. Is it subject to ERISA? Is it not subject to ERISA? We had the Chamber of Commerce who came and they staunchly opposed because they thought it was wrong that I deduct a percentage of money from poor people's checks. They thought it was immoral, quote unquote. I'd never heard the Chamber of Commerce take that position ever again in my entire life, So the question is, if the financial services industry looks at this picture not as a competitive issue, but rather for the whole country, for all Americans to have access to a modicum of dignity and respect, I believe that Republicans in Washington, D.C., and perhaps in other legislative state capitals throughout the country will sort of retreat a little and come to the table and engage in very thoughtful, collaborative fashion, because this is a bipartisan issue.
Well, Lisa points out that we're almost out of time. I wanted to get two more people in who have not spoken, David and then Jeremy.
I'm not a lawyer and I don't want to be one, but I did used to head the PBGC in the Employee Benefit Security Administration, and so I had three quick questions. One, who is the employer for tax qualification and ERISA purposes for this plan? Is this a multi-employer plan? And secondly, this is for you, Senator, I guess, and then, if you end up giving a guaranteed rate of return, aren't you basically talking about a defined dollar benefit plan? Which, by the way, is a defined benefit plan. It's just a different type of defined benefit plan. So that's my first question. Who is the sponsor? And if you give a guarantee, aren't you in effect creating a defined dollar benefit plan? And then for Kathleen, what other states are looking at this? And then last, for Chris, while people aren't concerned about inflation right now, they should be over time. And why hasn't the insurance industry provided more inflation-indexed annuities? I have one. I could only find one insurance company in America that was decently rated 2 years ago when I went to look for one. So, I mean, it's not just a matter of solving the problem today, but looking ahead and looking at purchasing power issues and things of that nature as to what can be done to deal with that issue. Thank you.
Well, we'll go this way, because mine is the easiest. The other states that are looking at this, Maryland, and has passed something that will go into summer study. Connecticut is moving along, sponsored, I think, by the President of the Senate. New York, the comptroller is very interested. Illinois, it sort of died in committee, but I think they're moving. Oregon just passed a bill, and Vermont's also interested. So that's where you are so far, and that was easy.
And be mindful, the activity throughout the various state capitals is a direct reflection of the inactivity that is happening in Washington, D.C. So folks are going to say, we're not going to wait for the feds to deal with this issue. We're going to deal with it as best as we can possible at the state level. Now, with regards to the DB issue, and is it a DB plan? We're taking, I believe, the best components of a defined benefit as best as I can possible, given the political realities and defined contributions, and I'm putting them together. So this is a new, wholly creative program. So it's not, you can't box it in, So it's a redefinition, a rebranding of taking the best components, if you will. With regards to the employer themselves have no fiduciary responsibility, and they're not on the hook, and they are not legally liable for any type of investment advice given to the employees themselves. They perform a ministerial duty, which is the deduction itself from the payroll. And we're trying to work out those components right now with ADP. And I realize with small businesses, not everyone has ADP. They don't run their whole operations, electronically. We have an independent board that's comprised of the treasurer, the controller. The governor gets 4 appointments. Governor Brown, that was a negotiated deal, that right before midnight, the governor and I. The director of finance, which falls under the executive branch. I get an appointment on the Senate side, as well as the Speaker of the Assembly. So it's going to be a reflection of the treasurer, the controller, and folks who represent small business, for example, folks who represent labor, for example, folks who have investment. Now, what we're going to do is, let me add one thing too, for Christine, because Christine, it was a fair question with regards to a fair playing field. And my idea is to have a request for proposal, a public-private partnership, which means if CalPERS wants to submit an RFP, they may do so. If Legg Mason or Vanguard or T. Rowe Price or Fidelity or others want to submit.
Or Barclays that does the federal system.
Or Barclays, who does the federal system for federal workers. If they want to submit, it's a different one? That's a different, okay. Yeah,
Sorry.
They can submit, their proposal for it. So we have an independent board. Therefore, the state of California, again, is not liable for that.
Maybe we can talk separately. But
Sure,
my
absolutely.
My question is a little different.
Okay,
Who
I'm
is
sorry
the
if I don't.
sponsor? Because under tax law and under ERISA law, you have employers and you have unions. Okay? So the question is, well, let's talk separately.
This will be the employee, this will be the individual, but I know where you're going with this. We can,
Yeah,
this
but
is,
it's
I'm gonna
not
make
clear
you-
to me what this is.
Yeah.
That's what lunch is
They'll be
for.
the
Yeah, I was
individual.
going to make you talk to Christine too.
Yeah.
Jeremy, do you have something very quickly, and that'll wrap us up? We're already over time.
I'll be as quick as I can. I was just thinking about two threads from Christine's comment about sort of technology and innovation, and I hope I'm not mischaracterizing your remarks, but it seemed to be that there's a lot of thinking about using technology and communication to explain to people how to use existing products. And unfortunately, John's stepped out of the room, but I was thinking of the comments last night about this notion that what the industry needs to be doing is designing beautiful products. And I'm going to steal a little bit of an offline conversation we were having last night with Gary before he left town. But, a retirement product should maybe work like an iPhone, where I don't need to know how the product works. I just need to pick it up and touch it. Or as Gary said, I don't need to figure out how my car works to drive it. Well, what about innovation within the industry that would make retirement security products? So instead of Kevin and his staff relying on other people to create essentially a new model, what's the industry's role in the design and innovation of beautiful products?
Yeah, I think I love the concept of beautiful products. I got to share that with my compliance folks as I worry about disclosures, and pages and pages of disclosures. I mean, I will point to, and again, I'm in I'll call it the group retirement plan business, and where simplicity is really, really important. And I know that there have been a range of issues associated with them, but I'll say the concept of target date funds is a simple concept. And its simplicity was reflected in the massive flows into that structure, because people could relate to, okay, this is when I'm going to retire, and so they're going to do all the work for me to invest accordingly. So that's an example and if we could do more of that, I mean, the in-plan annuity structure that we've got, we keep working on how do we keep it simple and beautiful so that people can understand it, and you don't have to spend a lot of time explaining it. So I'm completely with you on that point. And like I said, I got to get my compliance folks to understand that too.
Good luck with that.
Laura, can I just add one last thing,
Sure.
just real quickly?
Although everybody's hungry.
Yeah, I know. Just real quick, a politician knows not to get between folks' lunch and their drinks, But in the packet, you have a market prospectus. It gives a synopsis, and I just want to give a recognition, what recognition's due to Josh. Josh is brilliance with one of our meetings back in DC, and he has suggested that we do a prospectus, and I just wanted to give him a lot of recognition for his brilliance for this. And this is actually the one that we've come up with, and we're still working with McKinsey and the Anderson School of Business and Cal to work out the kinks. And the last thing I just want to say is this, is that I need fresh eyes from all of you to look at this, help move this together, because we're not at 50,000 feet in Washington, D.C. We are not at 40, 30, or 20,000 feet. We are actually at 1,000 feet in California. And if it doesn't happen in California, it's not going to happen throughout the country. And I doubt highly it's going to happen in Washington, D.C. And the reality is that we've left academia and we've left the think tank groups. we're almost at the finish line in the 20-yard red zone right now. And we don't want to be back here in Washington, and we don't want to be back in beautiful Aspen 5 years from now talking about this issue and poring over data all over again and having the experts from academia and from the think tank groups and Congressman X and Congressman Y and why we can't do this and why we can't do that. You know, the abstract theory. We want to be back here saying it was done in California, it was done in Oregon, Illinois, or it was done nationally at the federal level. You know, hopefully we have preemption. We want to make sure about that if it does happen. But we want to make sure that we're talking about how tens of millions of Americans got access to real retirement security opportunities. And what do we need to change here? What do we need to modify? What worked here and didn't work there? That's what we want.
Well, Kevin, I'm not going to be back here as a moderator, having failed my time management duties.
I'm just saying, that's all.
So with that,
Please, can we thank our